Alrighty, so I wanted to start you guys on a new model. This video won't be too long. It'll kind of be like some of the ones we've been doing earlier right now because they're some of the simpler models. It'll be about 15, 20-minute video or so. But at this point, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to you guys about how to kind of start making a lamp, right? How to do a revolve. And that's going to kind of be the big focus of this video. One of the things I also want to briefly show you guys, just if you guys want to know this, I find it's kind of useful organizationally. We have this thing called the outliner up here, right? And we've seen it, talked about it a bit before already. But you notice you turn the visibility off for stuff, right? So you notice sometimes if you kind of zoom out, you can kind of see how you've got your light and your camera. You may not want to see those, right? So what you can do, particularly when you're modeling, you can actually turn your camera and light visibility off. Now that does mean the light won't affect the scene. So like if you wanted to do or display things later on, you might want to turn that back on, but it is pretty easy to kind of turn the effect and the visibility of those things off and on. And you see they become grayed out, much like they would in Maya. So particularly for some of you guys that remember Maya last year and its outliner, this is the same kind of thing. It's just right there, easy to get to. One of the things that's also cool is these things called collections, and they're basically kind of like groups, really. So if you wanted to, you could actually kind of just right-click on the cube, right? And if you wanted to, you could actually create a new collection, right? There it is. And you can actually just drag that cube into that collection. So if you just wanted to turn the whole visibility for a collection off, right, you could do that. So it's kind of neat. You can kind of organize those and even turn the visibility off and on for collections. Just like this, you can rename them. Double-click. You can rename it, right? We could double-click this and call it maybe geometry or something like that. There we go. So kind of cool. I wanted to start to get you guys to see collections, right? It's kind of a way to group and organize stuff. That's kind of cool. All right. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things. Now I really wanted to get you guys to see how to do Revolve. Now in this case, we've got the cube geometry, right? And I'll get 4 to go to object mode, select it. And in this case, I'm going to go to 3 for face mode, right? 3 for face mode. All the faces are already selected. Right, remember you can always go to select all or select linked if you wanted to. And what I could do is I could hit delete and pick the faces option, and you notice that the faces are gone, but the cube is still there. So this is, unlike Maya, you can actually, this is a little more like Modo, you can actually, and Blender of course, this is Blender, you can actually have empty objects that have no polygons in them, right? Which is kind of cool. So in many ways, Blender is kind of this perfect amalgamation of the best of Maya, the best of Modo, some of its own really cool things it does, right? And it's one of the reasons why I'm kind of just, it's my favorite software now, because so much of what I've loved about all my other software is there, right? And for free. That's always awesome. So I just want to get rid of those faces, though, because I wanted something else in here, right? I wanted to actually start to show you guys how to use curves in Blender, right? We're going to use them here and there, not tons, but here and there. Now, there's this thing called a revolve, and it's actually not even called revolve in Blender. It's called screw, believe it or not, but it actually gives you the ability to revolve, but also make screw shapes. It's really, really neat, and I'm going to talk to you guys about it here in a minute. But it does want to use curves to make that surface, right? Just like you can actually extrude things along a curve, make tubes. We're going to see that for some of our room as well. So this is definitely going to be one of the projects we're going to use curves the most for modeling. You'll often hear them called splines, right? In Maya, they'd be NURBS curves. Here, they're actually NURBS curves also. And NURBS just stands for non-uniform rational B-spline. It's a mouthful, I know. But basically, they're curves, right? Blender does them a little bit differently. You can't really draw them in the normal sense that you would in Maya. But once you understand how they work, they still are quite user-friendly. They're just a little bit different, right? So it's kind of one of those things where not better, but different. But in this case, I can, just have that normal cube geometry that when we start a new scene, right? Because this is a new scene. And just when you do that file general, it just drops a cube in there. And I can honestly go to face mode, select all the faces, delete them, and the cube overall kind of object's still there even though there's no faces in it. And that's a good thing to know about Blender for you guys, that you can kind of do that. So what I want to do is I want to get a curve in here, right? Now, it's also going to be a little easier to shape and do this curve from kind of, say, like a side view, right? Right now we've been using perspective up to this point. But you will notice that we kind of do have these views right here, right? So if I want to see it exactly from kind of the x-axis, but flat and orthographic, right? These are what we call orthographic views. They have no perspective. You could do that, right? So these will give you the ability to kind of swap between those to see kind of top, front, left, right. Now, to get it back to perspective, all you have to do is hold the Alt-left mouse button. So just do your normal navigation. It'll go right back to perspective. So I can go there. And what I want to do is I want to go to Add, because we're already in one of our edit modes, right? Doesn't really matter which edit mode. In fact, vertices will probably be better for this one. So 1, right? And we go to Add. Sorry, Matt. I'm not saying Add. I probably should have left my faces there, to be honest. That sometimes works a little better, so let me undo a couple steps. There we go. Kind of leave those in there. Go to save vertex mode. Why am I not seeing that? I'm going to have to do this in object mode. There we go. And you could actually get rid of this. You could delete it. You can keep it if you want to. I think we'll keep it for the moment. You do want to be in object mode, though. I kind of forget that sometimes. So 4 for object mode, right? And go to Add, and you'll notice you have a lot more options, right? So what you can do is you can go to Add Curve, right? And you'll see that you can have Bezier curves, you can have NURBS curves, you can have circles, right? We're just going to use a NURBS curve, right? So I'm going to click NURBS curve. Now you'll notice that when I come in here, it's not exactly where we want it to be. And in this case, I think I'm going to go to Add Curves option here, right? So see there's an option down here. And also just click maybe wireframe really quick just so we can kind of see it. The curve's flat, right? So what you can do is you could change the alignment, right, to view. And then you see how it'll kind of actually line the curve up with the view you're in. So it is important when you go to Add Curve, NURBS curve, that you go down here to the options and change the alignment to view, right? So there we go. We've got our NURBS curve in there. At this point, if I want, I can just go to Cube, hit delete to delete it, and you'll see the NURBS curve is its own thing. It's good to kind of get you guys to see the fact that you can delete all your curves and the collection stuff, so I kind of wanted you to see it anyways. So here's our curve. Now, here's the thing is we select it, right? It's an object, so we can left-click on it. And I'm going to hit 1, because 1 is going to go to edit mode for vertex. And you're going to see we have the ability to select these vertices. And we can hit W for move. We can start to move these down and over. And you see how it's kind of giving us these points controlling the curve, right? Now, this is a little bit different than the curves you might have seen in Maya. But once you get used to it, it's actually neat and works well, and it's just different. Believe it or not, you can actually use extrude, right? Control E to create another point. So if you select kind of one of the endpoints, right, and I say Control E, I can hold middle mouse button down to kind of draw out another point, middle mouse button to draw another point, and you'll see that there's actually a curve being created there, right? So I can just kind of keep drawing in some of these shapes if I want to. I can go down here and I can extrude this one out, extrude it. You see how the curve's being created there? So believe it or not, you can actually extrude the end points, right? And just keep middle mouse click with Control E to create more points. Now, of course, I can hit W to go back to Move Tool, and I can grab the vertices that I have, and I can move them around to create more shape. But you'll see there is a curve here. In fact, if I go 4, you can see what that curve looks like. Now, you'll notice we're doing it, like I said, from side view, right? And we're actually also doing it kind of based off of and with a little bit of a gap from that z-axis, right? That up axis. So it's kind of good to know that we have these curves. Now, these curves can do a lot more than this, and you see that that works pretty well, and it's pretty easy to use. So it's a bit different the way Maya does it, but it's not harder, right? It's just different. In particular, when you're kind of snapping a geometry to a surface, which we'll see later on in later projects, it's actually pretty cool, right? So it's one of those things that's a little bit weird, but it's pretty neat. It can do some cool things for it. So just kind of keep that in mind, is that it's, for some of you guys who've never seen anything different, but for like Maya, you just left click, draw points, and that works quite nicely. Here, it's a little bit different, but also works pretty well. What you could do with these curves, though, with the default modifiers is quite cool. So even though drawing the curves in is not I wouldn't say is really worse than Maya. It's different than Maya. Some of the other things you can do with the curves in here are cooler than Maya. So remember, 1 is how you'd edit it. And what's cool, though, is you can actually grab several vertices. And if you right-click, you'll see that you have Curve Context-Sensitive menu. And if I hit Subdivide, you'll notice it adds 2 points to those areas you had selected. So if you want to actually add some sections here, you can. You do have to select at least 2, though, right? And then hit Subdivide, and you see how it kind of adds that point there. Believe it or not, if you go Q and keep hitting Q to go to your tweak tool will also work on these, right? So you totally have the ability to use your tweak tool on these curves to kind of adjust the shape and the position for these curves. So once you get used to it, the curve functionality is quite cool, quite easy to use, right? And it's just keeping in mind that you want to select the end ones, right? So I'm just going to probably toggle that back to the regular selection tool, move. You can always grab these ends. These ones, if you extrude, you can do it, but it kind of creates this weird thing there, right? Kind of like its own, almost its own version of non-manifold curves. So you really want to grab the end ones to kind of add more points to it, right? And if you want to add points in between, right, we can just grab at least 2. Although, like I said, you could actually do 3 or 4, so you can subdivide a bunch, right? But at least 2. I will do 3 in this case. Right-click, subdivide, and it adds those extra points there for you, right? So that'll allow you to kind of control these curves to get a more and more interesting shape, right? So we can see that that's kind of cool, and this is our first kind of foray into using curves in Blender. Like I said, they're actually quite user-friendly. They are a little bit different than the way Maya does them. The curve itself isn't, but the way you edit them is a little bit different, right? You kind of have to extrude the ends and then subdivide kind of segments, which has to be at least a couple of vertices and stuff like that. But once you understand those 2 things, it's quite fast and easy to draw a curve. You do always want to be in edit mode, because like you'll see if you go to 2, 3, it doesn't really do anything. So 1 is kind of the big thing here. 4, of course, takes you back to object mode, and you can actually see that object, right? Now, at this point, I've been drawing it also flat to create this shape, right? So if I hold down Alt, left mouse button, and rotate, you'll see it's flat in relation to kind of that red axis, right? So like I said, that's kind of your ability to kind of switch your views. And then just Alt, left mouse button to kind of, rotate around. So that gives us a curve. And there's a modifier inside of here, right? So we go to the blue wrench. We go to Add Modifier, and there's a modifier called Screw. Believe it or not, this actually gives you your Revolve, but it does more, which is kind of neat. So I'm going to apply Screw, and you'll notice that that's doing some really weird stuff. That looks abstract. Well, that's because we have to pick the proper axis, right? So you see how we can switch these axes to give us our different results. I'm going to turn this back to shaded also, right? Remember, that's wireframe, that's shaded. So when we pick the correct axis, you see it'll actually use that curve and try to create a shape based on that axis. In this case, we want Y. And you will notice that this already creates so much of that kind of futuristic, kind of neat lamp shape that we want. And we're going to do some more modeling to it outside of this. But I wanted to show you guys how to use revolves and get usable geometry out of a revolve. Now, what's really cool about this is that we have this thing called Screw. And if I start to turn this up, you'll see how it offsets upward this shape. And if you keep turning the angle up, you'll see it does even more and more of a screw shape, right? And you can control the iterations for how often it goes up. And that is, and obviously I went up way too high with 63, right? But I think you guys are already starting to see that your screw modifier is actually a revolve, but it is actually a screw modifier also. So that is super cool, right? So like I said, once you guys start to play with Blender's, remember F is frame selection, right? Just like it is in Maya. I'm going to turn this back to 0, and I'm going to turn that back to 360 degrees, because 360 degrees is a full circle, right? So if I typed in, like, say, 180, half of 1, right? And you see that this is a modifier. So as long as you still have this modifier here, you can come back and adjust this, right? But that's kind of really neat that you can pick the axis, and that automatically already does it for you, but that you actually get these features right here, which actually allow you to do screw shapes, right? So if I did a simpler circle shape, you could literally do a spring. Super easy, right? The other thing you have to be aware of is two other things. One is steps variation. So I'm going to turn this down. You see how this is kind of your divisions around this way? So I want that to be maybe like 12. But this division is actually not in here, right? Very dense. So we actually want to go from the blue wrench to the green curve, right? Because remember, this is a modifier applied to a curve. So if I go to the actual green curve here, it's right above our material stuff, you will notice in here that this has a resolution for that curve. And that controls the subdivision amount for that. So usually like 2 or 3 is pretty good for that one. I think 2 will work fine for us, keep it simpler. So that's kind of cool, and you can play with some other settings here for it. I'm going to let you in a sneak peek. If you go to geometry, you can actually thicken this into a tube. When we do our hoses later on, you're going to be impressed. So we don't have to worry about that right now, though. But right now, this is still really, if I go to 1 for edit mode, you see how I can still kind of edit the curve. So I can grab those points if I want to, and I can still adjust the shape a bit. Right? I kind of liked where it was at. But you'll see how if you go back to edit mode, you're just editing the curve again to adjust shape and form. Right? So you can kind of go in here and move that out a little bit, right, if you wanted to. But it's not really geometry you can edit, right? Because it's really a modifier applied to a curve. So the way you actually apply this is not so much through this guy right here, right? You'll see it gives you a warning. Transform curve to mesh in order to apply constructive modifiers. So whereas we normally would apply a modifier, here it's a bit different, right? We have to right-click on it, or just around it, because it's the object context menu, right? So being 4 for object mode, right-click, and you see there's something called convert to mesh. That modifier has been applied, and you see if we go to face mode, there's our actual lamp that we could start to model from. So I'm just going to save as, right? We'll call this, sci-fi lamp. Sci-fi underscore room underscore lamp underscore 3D game art. Just gives us that kind of naming convention we can kind of follow. Save as. There we go. And that's a great way to kind of start to get us introduced to the